Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the launch of our first Generosity Report. We are delighted to be able to share this exciting moment with you all. Thank you for coming, and thank you to the events team here at the RSA for hosting us so beautifully. Welcome too to everyone joining us via live stream. We're so pleased that you can be with us this lunchtime. My name is Felicity Griffiths, and I'm the Chief Financial and Operating Officer at Stewardship. I'll shortly be handing you over to our Chief Purpose Officer, Daniel Jones, who will give you a brief introduction to the report and its key findings. That will take around 15 minutes and will be followed by a panel discussion with our CEO, Janie Oliver. Joe Evans, the lead researcher from Whitestone Insight, who we commissioned to conduct the study, will then join Janie to help take some questions from the floor. Finally, our Chief Customer Officer, Nicola Johnson, will close the session, which we plan to finish around 2:20. You will then be welcome to stay for networking over some light refreshments upstairs. 2 final points. Please note there are journalists attending today. We are live streaming and taking photos. If you do not wish to be recorded, please let a member of the stewardship team know. Lastly, if you're sharing on social media, please use our hashtag Generosity Report. I'll now hand you over to Daniel.
Good afternoon. We are delighted to launch this first Generosity Report. If you are in the room, please wave in the air. I just want to check people have got your physical copies. Wonderful. And hopefully those following online will have been able to download their copy too. If you've had a look, you'll see we have already covered a lot of ground in this report. Do not worry, I'm not going to try and go through everything in the next 15 minutes. We believe that this provides the most definitive view of Christian giving in the UK to date, and there is a lot in there. So I just want to spend a couple of moments just introducing the report, going through a couple of the key findings, and then make way for the panel discussion. So let's start with what the Generosity Report is and where's it come from. Let me start by setting the scene. At Stewardship, our vision is a thriving kingdom economy where God's people share their resources generously to advance the gospel. And over the last 18 months, we've dared to dream more about what that world would look like. A world where all Christians experience the joy and fulfillment of living and giving generously. A world where more and more of our churches, charities, and Christian workers move from a position of surviving to thriving. And those ministries have the resources they need to bring hope and transformation to their local communities and to our nation. Stewardship sits in a blessed position, and we acknowledge that. We already serve a particular subset of Christians in the UK who use our services as a tool for their Christian practice of giving, trusting us to annually distribute over £100 million to the causes that they care about. Over 30,000 give with us, over 5,000 of whom use their stewardship account to prioritise and manage their financial giving, all in one place, set apart from other expenses and payments. And when we speak to those we serve, our own informal polls will regularly show that average giving from that community as a proportion of their income sits within a range of 11 to 14% often. For many, the decision to give generously, often sacrificially, is intrinsic to their faith and is at the top of their financial priorities. But as we considered the landscape and considered this report, we wanted to challenge our experience. How generous are all Christians in the UK? How often do we see those same levels of proportionate giving reflected across all of Christendom? What do Christians think about generosity? What prompts Christians to give, and what are some of the barriers that stop them from giving? What really is the giving potential of Christians in the UK, if we dared to dream? This first Generosity Report both establishes the current state of Christian giving in the UK and begins to explore what might be. It is definitely a beginning, not an end. From the very first results, the findings have presented both an encouragement and a challenge, and our hope is that this data will lead to a greater understanding of how to better invite generosity and grow support for Christian ministry. Our prayer is that together we can unlock the giving potential of Christians in the UK. So before I jump in, I'm very conscious there are some very data-orientated people in the room. So we're going to just quickly go through some of the key parts of this, the research methodology. To complete this report, first of all, we want to acknowledge the partnership that we established with Whitestone Insight. We set them these 4 bold research objectives. Number 1, provide robust quantitative and qualitative data on the UK Christian giving landscape. Number 2, how do we better understand the mindset of generous donors? Number 3, how do we explore those motivations to give or not give? And 4, how do we provide insights into the factors that drive and hinder Christian generosity? As we scoped this, we then moved into thinking of this in 2 parts. On the quantitative side, we polled over 4,000 UK Christian adults. The data was weighted to be representative of religious identification data taken from the 2021 censuses in England and Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. Once that was complete, we then moved on to interviewing 15 participants who we selected from a pool of 140 applicants. And these fell into the segmentation that we created, which was practicing Christians. These were those who attend church and read the Bible at least once a month, amongst other things. And they also gave more than the averages that we were seeing. And we selected this group in order to really get into the detail of what some of the motivations and barriers were to generous giving. Also, a quick side note on tithing. You will see us refer to tithing, and you'll see that in the report. For the purposes of the research, we define tithing as giving 10% of income after tax, i.e. what is going into someone's bank account. And we did that in order to just try and get greater consistency in responses between both the quantitative and the qualitative. I'm not proposing that we go into a panel discussion on tithing unless the panel really chooses to, but I don't think we have enough time today. Let's have a look first of all at the UK giving potential. Well, I think I would describe this as there is encouraging news and there is more encouraging news. Encouragingly, Christians are giving generously when compared to national averages. More encouragingly, there is significant giving potential that could still be unlocked. So I'm just going to run through some of the headlines now. Like I said, everything is in this report, so please take the time to work your way through it. So let's take a look at the giving potential quickly. According to our research, UK Christians are giving an average of £73 per month, which equates to 3.2% of their income after tax. If we compare that with the next available data source, for us it's Charities Aid Foundation's 2023 report, that comes in at £8 higher than their quoted average of £65 per month for all UK citizens. However, if we zoom into the practicing Christians category, then that proportion doubles. Practicing Christians give 6.3% of their monthly income, an average of £167 per month, and close to 3 times that is quoted by CAF. I'm going to give us a very quick whistle-stop tour through some of the key findings in the report, pull out a few things, and then we'll move on to the panel. So, as we looked at the findings, we realized that there were some themes emerging. We've grouped our findings under these 3 headings. First of all, active faith, what's happening inside of someone and their relationship to God that is making a difference in their lives, and particularly with regards to generosity. Second, what about the relational aspect of generosity and giving? Where does the relationship between those who give and those who receive make a difference? And then finally, how do we unlock the giving potential in the UK? So let's rattle through these very, very quickly. Number 1, regular church attendance more than doubles propensity to give. We found that 71% of practicing and church-going Christians, those who attend church at least once a month, give monthly across all Christian causes, 71% of those gave. By contrast, only 28% of those in the cultural Christian category do the same. We also found clear indicators that engaged faith leads to engaged giving. Practicing Christians are most likely to budget to give monthly donations to their Christian causes. This was backed up also in our interviews. We saw very strong themes of people being deliberate and intentional around giving decisions. And there was a wonderful quote from Monica. Maybe you'll recognize Monica as someone in your church somewhere. She said, "It is a part of Christianity to not just be throwing money at things willy-nilly." Real intentionality and thought goes into some of the decisions. Interestingly, however, while all of our interviewees fell into the category of practicing Christian, we didn't necessarily see that practice translate into the attitudes to money being predominantly motivated or shaped by their faith. There was still a disconnect between the finance decisions people were making and the faith decisions that they were making. Let's have a think about connection to causes for a second. So, third point here, third finding, an appeal or personal approach triggers spontaneous giving. Most Christians give in response to being asked, rather than proactively seeking things to give to. In fact, over half of those surveyed have what we would describe as a set and forget approach to their giving currently. On average, 53% said they didn't know or they couldn't remember or they have never reviewed their giving. And a challenge to churches and church leaders who might be listening in. When asked about the prompts to review their giving over the last 2 years, 54% had never been asked to do this by their church. But fear not, because, point number 4, those who trust the causes they support are likely to be more generous to all causes and an encouragement for the church. Those that we surveyed, 76% of those who gave across all Christian causes at least once a month, described the relationship with their church as one of trust. They trust their church a lot. One interviewee, for example, also summarized their attitude of trust beautifully by describing, "When I give to my church or the things my church gives to, it's like giving to my family." Next, point number 5, people will feel more driven to give if they feel connected to a ministry or cause that can make a difference. The top 3 things that we saw here that encourage donors in their giving related to feeling a part of something that can make a difference. People describe being able to see the impact that their giving would have on people in their community. And 25% describe feeling a part of the ministry they were supporting, and that being a key motivator to give more and to give more frequently. Fewer people, however, give to Christian workers, those who are in Christian ministry and receiving funds directly to pay for that work. But the donations made to them are higher than other causes. So when we asked those who gave to Christian workers roughly how much they gave, the average donation size here was around £40 per month, higher than the £28 per month on average going to Christian charities, £30 going to secular charities, and was second only to the gifts going to their church at £53. So then let's move on. How do we unlock the giving potential? Well, first of all, we wanted to understand what might some of the barriers be, and we discovered there are 2 key barriers currently to giving, one of which is feeling unable to afford to give, and then also a lack of trust that donations will be used well. And you'll see in the report lots of other details, some of those other factors at play. 50% of those surveyed said that they couldn't really afford to start giving or give more. It's worth noting at this point that we conducted this research in November 2023, when the cost of living was probably at its most acutest. In the interviews, we tried to tease out more around this, some of these barriers. And what we also then discovered is 2 interesting attitudes, possibly even a spectrum of attitudes, from a scarcity mindset, where giving takes its place amongst maintaining and affording a certain lifestyle, and then a plenty mindset, where respondents describe the motivation to give coming from a place of gratitude for what God has given them, and seeing giving and the causes they support as intrinsic to that lifestyle. And then finally, point 8, those who discuss their giving tend to give more themselves. An encouragement to us all as you leave here today, please discuss giving. We would love for you to share more about this report. over 1 in 5 of those who give more than 11 to 15% of their income discuss their giving with friends or family more than every few months. Meanwhile, almost 2/3 of those that give less than 1% never, ever discuss their giving with anybody. So there's a lot to take in. Just as I close, a few other points, and then I will hand over to our panel. So in addition to the key findings, you'll see there's lots of data tables, et cetera, we now are gathering this data set on a range of questions, and the goal here is that we can create some benchmarking that we can come back to year on year on year and continually monitor and evaluate how is the church performing, how are Christians giving in the UK. For example, here we have the average amounts that are given in each cause area currently. In addition to that, as we've done the qualitative interviews and received initial feedback from the report, it's now revealing new areas that we want to press into. So for example, if we come back just for a brief second to the matter of tithing, we can see that in the interviews, a third of interviewees understood tithing as giving 10% after tax. There was a familiarity with that language and what tithing was. But then in further conversations, of that 5, only 3 had considered that as a personal goal for their giving. So there's an area that we could press into in future reports. So as I come to a close, can I encourage you to pore over this report, interrogate it, take it back to your teams, take it back to your networks. We offer this to you, and we would love for you to engage in the findings so far. We would love to take the opportunity as well to dive deeper into the findings with you, possibly with your networks, press into some of those details, and explore areas of interest for our next report, which we will be scoping very shortly. Thank you for listening, and I now would like to invite our panelists to begin to assemble on the stage here, and Stewardship CEO, Janie Oliver. Janie, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Daniel said, my name is Janie Oliver, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Stewardship. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we are just so delighted to be able to launch our inaugural generosity report. We are hugely excited. Is the mic crackling? We're all right. Maybe it's third time lucky. Third time lucky, yes, there we go. Right, so we're hugely excited to discuss the findings with our panel. Right, but before we do that, I'm going to just introduce them to all of you. So starting here on my left, I'm very excited to introduce Chinny MacDonald. Chinny is the director of Theos, the Religion and Society think tank, having previously been the head of public engagement at Christian Aid. She has 2 decades of experience in journalism, media, and communications across faith, media, and international development organizations. Chinny speaks and writes regularly on issues of faith, race, and gender, and is the author of God is Not a White Man and Other Revelations, which was a runner-up for the Michael Ramsey Prize for Theological Writing. She has a new book coming out in early 2025, Unmaking Mary, The Myth of Motherhood, and is also the vice chair of Greenbelt Festival and a trustee of Christian Aid. So Chinny, we're delighted to have you here. Next, I'll move on to Deborah. Deborah Green, OBE Deputy Lieutenant, is the National Director and founder of Redeeming Our Communities, a charity founded 20 years ago in 2004. Deborah has 25 years of experience in bringing organizations together towards the goal of social transformation, starting with her home city of Manchester. She received an OBE in 2012 in recognition of services to community cohesion and has recently been appointed as Deputy Lieutenant in Greater Manchester. She also has several books published. So please welcome Deborah. Moving on to Bishop Mike Royal. Mike is the General Secretary of Churches Together in England. He is also former co-CEO of the Cinnamon Network, helping churches engage with best practice in social action. And he is former National Director of award-winning Vulnerable Children and Young People's charity, Transforming Lives for Good. Mike has an academic background in urban planning and Black theology, and he is a mental health chaplain with Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Foundation Trust. So please join me in welcoming Mike. And at the end of the row, we have Reverend Wendy Pawsey. Wendy has over 25 years of experience of managing and growing finance in the world of banking, church leadership, and fundraising. Wendy is now the head of giving for the Evangelical Alliance. Wendy is also an ordained minister with the Elam Church, a trustee for Regents Theological College, as well as a trustee for Urban Saints. Wendy has a real passion for seeing Christians released into the gift of generosity, and very excitingly has a book, Generous with a capital G, being released in September. So please welcome Wendy. Finally, not on stage just yet, but joining us later for the Q&A session of our conversation, we will be welcoming Joe, who's sitting here in the front row, Joe Evans. Joe is a consultant with Whitestone Insight and has been the lead researcher on this project. Before joining Whitestone, Joe spent 3 years at the Evangelical Alliance in their advocacy team, where she was the lead author on Living for Jesus at Work and host of the news and culture podcast Cross Section. Joe's research and reports have received endorsements from MPs and CEOs of major charities, and she has spoken on her work at national conferences. We're delighted that Joe can join us today, and so please join me in welcoming her. Great, so on to the questions. So I'm going to direct my first question at Wendy. So Wendy, how do you think these findings compare to what we learn about generosity in the Bible? Do you have a microphone?
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah. Excellent. Such an interesting question, not one that we're going to be able to answer in its entirety right here and now. But I do think there's a lot of correlation, there's a lot of crossovers. But just to go back, if we look at giving in the Bible, if we look at it in the Old Testament, it was very much a communal affair. If we look at 1 Chronicles 29, when King David comes and he's looking to build a temple, and he gets everyone together and he says to them, come. He does the rally cry of consecration, and we know that he's given so much gold and so much silver and precious jewels, and he's able to go ahead and he's able to build a temple, and people are able to see what it is that he's built. They're able to enjoy it. They're able to appreciate it. It's very much a group, a community thing. And then we move to the New Testament, and things change slightly. We know from Acts 2, 42 to 47, that there's still that aspect of people giving and seeing their neighbour benefit, of seeing the person down the road benefit, of seeing where their money is going. But there's also that individualistic aspect as well. Again, we see that with the widow's mite. We see it with Mary pouring oil onto Jesus' feet. And I think a lot of that has carried through to today. That attitude has carried through that whole community and the individual side. But where the difference comes is back then, they didn't have social media. They wasn't inundated. They didn't have lots and lots of different letters coming through their postbox. Where I think sometimes now, as Christians, we can feel giving fatigue. There's the other side of that, where people are never asked. They're never encouraged to give. they're never told about the benefit. There's no teaching on it. So I think that's where the attitudes very much differ. Back then, it was part of your everyday life. You saw the impact it had, where now we can sometimes feel a little bit removed. Does that answer your question? I could carry on going on, but there's 3 incredibly qualified people sitting between us.
Does anyone else want to add? No? Okay. Great. Thank you. Mike, can I come to you next? How do you think society might be transformed if we were able to unlock this full giving potential of the church?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we understand, particularly kind of in a time where we've had the cost of living crisis, where we've come out of the pandemic, people are really feeling the pinch. And of course we have an election, a snap election taking place. And actually one of the things that we've been saying at Churches Together in England is that poverty has to be at the heart of this election. I'm not saying it's the only issue, there are lots of other issues, but really the cost of living crisis has hit those at the bottom the hardest. And I think the church has a really important part to play in that. I think what's really interesting is this survey was done really at the height of the cost of living crisis, and yet there was faithful giving there. And so some of the key ways in which we can further unlock that giving is really, really important. And I think some of the principles that have already come out, the principle of actually people need to see where their money is going, to see that it's making a difference. I personally know I love giving to organisations where I can tangibly see where the money is going and the difference that it's making to people's lives. So for me, that's a really important issue. But I think the other thing is we've got to talk. We've got to be more honest about giving. As I was just preparing for this, every week we have a moment in our church where we give. But I've got to say, I can't remember the last time where we had a sermon on giving. So I think we've just got to be a bit more bold about addressing this whole issue of giving and generosity, because generosity is absolutely at the heart of the Christian faith. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I think that's an important point that you bring up, because our research showed that I think over half of our respondents in the last 2 years couldn't remember or said that they hadn't heard of a time that giving had been talked about in their churches. And that's a pretty interesting / worrying statistic, that over half the respondents hadn't heard giving talked about in their churches in the last 2 years. So I think you're spot on there. Deborah, if I come to you next, what do you think it would take to close the giving gap, or expand on this giving opportunity that the findings point to?
Thank you. I think we're speaking to this today on the backdrop of the fact that charity, a lot of you are charity leaders as well as church leaders. Charities are struggling. Hundreds of charities are closing down. Hundreds of charities are finding it hard to make ends meet. And yet charity work is needed more than ever before. So I think the context is, thank you to Stewardship Services for raising this report, because we need to be more generous with our giving. But I was quite fascinated, what will it take to close the giving gap? I love that question. And in thinking about it, I liked what your report said about cause finders. What is it that motivates people to give? If people can see the impact, like Mike says, but what are people passionate about? Are they passionate about safety on our streets, for example, debt? Are they passionate about poverty? And for example, CAP, the debt counselling service, have told us that 65% of their clients cannot afford to buy a winter coat. That's huge. the cost of living crisis has already been referred to. Are people passionate about that to keep people warm? Will that motivate giving? So I think the cause finder is really important. And then the charity sector has the opportunity to add value to your giving. I won't give an appeal afterwards for people to donate to our charities, but you can add value because, for example, we were given some money to set up a community centre in a place in Oldham, in Manchester, quite a poor community. And the police then gave us £100,000 from proceeds of crime to extend the facility that we were able to buy. So charities and churches, to some extent, can attract extra giving to people's giving, and people always like that. And the final thing is the social benefits of giving. I think sometimes people don't realise the value of being part of a network, being with others, being motivated to give. And the Journal of Health and Psychology tells us, on ageing, tells us that you will live longer if you volunteer, and volunteering is part of giving, and giving helps you to live longer. Now, I think if we shared that statistic, that might help as well.
That's brilliant. Love that. Right. So, Chenny, I'll come to you next. How do you think that churches and charities can really share their mission in a clear, compelling way? We've spoken a little bit about the importance of that, but how do you think that they can do that to really encourage people to support and give to them?
So many things I want to say, but I think the first thing, one of the things that has come through a bit already in the panel conversation, is that telling the story about your mission in the first place is really important. So speaking, writing, emailing, sharing leaflets, letters, whatever it is, in a multitude of different ways that you can connect with whether it's your supporters or the people in your church. But I'd say that both for churches and charities in particular, if we look at the context in which we're in as a nation, there is a lack of trust in institutions. But for most people who are practicing Christians who go to church regularly, the place that they trust most is your church community. That is a place where they feel most connected. So I would encourage church leaders, charity leaders to lean into that trust and know that in some cases all you need to do is ask. I think we assume that people know our need when they don't. People are busy. They forget sometimes what it is that they've experienced or seen on a Sunday. And within that wider context is, we at Theos did some research a couple of years ago called a Torn Safety Net, which we talk often about the cost of living crisis and how it's affecting individuals. But for charities and churches, if you look at even the cost of heating the building, the cost of buying biscuits, all of these things have massively increased to the point where we are struggling. And we need to tell that story because telling the story of just surviving for those communities, it would be enough for people to step up their giving or to give in the first place. So I'd say kind of leaning into that trust and connection that you already have. I also think that yes, people give to causes, but they give to people that they care about. I think about all of my friends or people who do sponsored walks or marathons or whatever. I can't remember what charities that they are running for or walking for. It's them that I want to support because they are doing it. So I will give because they've asked. So thinking about the connection between us and the people that we love. And then lastly, I'll say that my background is Nigerian. My family is not shy about asking for money. It is part of our is part of how we do life. It's not an awkward thing. So I think about how, when someone gets married in my global family, I may not have seen them, I may not have ever met them in my life, or a family member dies. I know that on the global family WhatsApp there will be a spreadsheet sent round, and it'll be which family is giving how much to get this person buried or married. And we invest in that because that's our family. And so I was interested in how the report talked about how for many of the practicing Christians, it's their church community that is their family. So of course they would give. We should just ask.
Very valuable insights. Thank you so much. Not having much luck with these mics, but thank you to our panel. That was very, very helpful. Before we open up for Q&As to the floor, I might just ask, was there anything in the report that maybe jumped out and surprised you? If anyone would like to share a thought or an insight on that.
Yeah, the tithing statistic surprised me. It seemed to be something that people didn't know much about, and as Wendy has already said, these principles are really deep in Scripture. I mean, think about the principle of gleaning, of actually leaving the outer border of your field, so that those who are poor, those who are in need, those who are foreigners, are orphans, they can have something. And then, of course, that scripture, bring all the tithes into the storehouse. And actually, that's a communal scripture, as Wendy was saying. It's not about prosperity gospel, okay? It's about actually you bring it into the storehouse. That money was then used to support the Levites, but once again also to support those who were poor as well and in need. And so actually, if we can see tithing as an opportunity to support those in need, then I think that would be hugely encouraging. And this final thing to say, I mean, the Bible's very specific on tithing. It kind of says at the beginning of the week, gather together and set some money aside. I think Paul says that in 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2. So there's some very specific stuff that we're told, and yet kind of, it seemed that that's something that people had a little bit missed.
To Wendy, thank you. Thanks, Mike.
It wasn't something that surprised me so much, but more an opportunity. So I love reading about various different stats, and at the moment within the UK, we have more food banks operating out of churches than there is a certain very well-known brand, a fast food restaurant. We also, as churches, contribute 12.4 billion to the UK economy in value. And I just think that's amazing. That's equivalent to what the NHS spend on mental health care for England. And we do all of that with that 2.5%. And I just think, how amazing would it be if we did increase that? How many more lives could we impact? I'm going to stop there because I'm going to go off and start preaching. But it would just be, the potential that is there is fantastic.
I'm going to say it because maybe you can't, as usual. I was surprised at how low the actual number is of monthly giving, and I'm not just talking out there, but challenging myself. And I know how you've pitched it very positively, closing the gap. So why am I surprised at that? Maybe because there are some assumptions, or we haven't had these numbers before in this way. So I think having people be brave within our churches and say an actual number that they might give a testimony of, we give this percent, or this is how we do our giving, might be a way to encourage other people. And I think a second thing is an opportunity, sorry if I've missed it in the report, but the opportunity for legacies as a way to significantly increase income for churches and charities. There might be lots of people who don't have much monthly disposable income. Maybe they are older people, but they do have houses, and it could be that we could encourage them to give in their wills to the places that have been their community for many, many years. It may be that we'll just have to wait longer because they're living longer because they're giving. They might be giving all part of a church community. But I think there's an opportunity for legacies.
Thank you. That's very valuable. I'm now going to invite Joe up onto the stage, and we're going to open up the floor for questions so we can ask our panel some questions that you might have. So, Joe, if you'd like to join us.
I'm going to move over here, and I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have. So we're going to do this the old-fashioned way, where you just put your hands up, and we're going to have a roving mic.
Go ahead first, because it's easier to get to.
Thank you. It's Ben from IDEO Research. I wonder if there was any correlation between giving and discipleship, maturity and faith, that kind of thing. I would expect there to be a correlation in that more mature or, churchgoers would give more. I'm interested in if you saw any kind of relationship that might suggest giving is something that leads us deeper in our discipleship, because I think this is an area that church leaders potentially don't explore so much. Almost they're embarrassed about money. They really want discipleship. But when the rubber hits the road and we have to surrender our lives to God, I think that giving is part of that, and I'd love to see if any of this data backed that assumption up.
I think I might ask Jo if she'd like to give an opinion on that.
Yeah, that seems a fitting question. Thank you. It's a really great question. And I think it highlights something that, together with Stewardship, we want to look into more in the future, of better understanding the relationship between causation and correlation when it comes to different demographics and the giving patterns that we've seen in this report. As has been mentioned, it was a consistent pattern throughout every area of giving that practicing Christians, so those that attend church at least once a month, those who read their Bible at least once a month, gave more generously. At this point, we don't have exact data on why that is. Is it for practical? Well, we know there'll be practical factors of the fact that if you're at church more, you're going to hear that call for offering more often. You're going to hear what the church is up to. You're going to hear from individuals who are trying to raise support. But I think that's definitely something that we want to look into, because surely, from how we know of how the teaching of God's word works, how the Spirit works, surely there's also a spiritual element in that by attending church more often, by reading God's word more often, individuals will be moved spiritually to be more like Christ, to be more generous. So I think you're right that there is a causation. That's something that we definitely want to dig into more in the future.
Thank you. Should we go to Andrew?
Okay, I'm going to try and answer a question that ties up two things that people said on the panel. Firstly, to Wendy, I'd just say, I think it goes back further than just social media. I think probably the disconnection we have between generosity and ourselves at the moment comes from actually, back to the Enlightenment, where we actually saw ourselves as atomized individuals rather than as a part of a community. And also then Chine mentioned about, her upbringing, obviously, with the Nigerian roots. And I was just thinking, I work for Tear Fund, and we get to see many opportunities of generosity around the world. And most of our churches now are very, very diverse as well, becoming more diverse. How can we use that experience of actually what generosity looks around for different Christians around the world to inspire people in the UK to really inspire their generosity? Because I think there's some great stories out there.
Mike and Chinny, who wants to go first? Chinny, do you want to go first?
I'll start with, because I used to work at Christian Aid, so similarly, development is a very interesting area to work in when it comes to kind of giving, how you tell stories. One thing that I would say about the diaspora communities in the UK, I hope I get this stat right, I think this comes to the trust issue of trust in institutions and trust that if I give to your charity or this church, that it will go to where the need is. Diaspora communities send more back home to their families than I think the total of the aid budget in the UK, right? So there is some kind of disconnect between me giving to my church or a charity here or Tearfund or Christian Aid, rather than me giving directly to my own family who are facing poverty in other places, because it's not the willingness to give that is the issue. It's the I trust these people more. So we have to kind of work on that. But I think there is something about telling the stories about how communities in other places around the world give to yes, their families and their communities, but they do that because life is not individual or atomized. Life, like, we are not individual beings. We are part of communities. So me giving is, in effect, as part of this kind of gift economy. We give, we know we will get it back at some point because we are, the Ubuntu term, we are one.
Yeah, and you finished with the point I was going to pick up, that principle of Ubuntu. I am because we are, and that's really important. We can definitely go back to the Enlightenment, but actually I'd like to take us forward and say, and I'm old enough to remember kind of when Mrs. Thatcher came into power, kind of 1979, and those statements around there's no such thing as society, and the individualism that then came, and we had the crash of 1987, and the huge amounts of money that people were making at the time, and I still feel that sense of society, that sense of I am my brother's keeper, has been lost. And I wonder in this moment, in this desperate political moment, I wonder whether we will get that back or continue further and further down the path we're already on.
Thank you. Oh, lots of hands. Where are you going, Ruth? I think we had a hand in the front here next.
Thanks, Ruth, very much. Thank you very much for all that you've done. Simon Austin, I work for Wycliffe. I was a church leader. And one of the questions that comes to my mind that might be answered in the report, which I've not yet read, is your 3.2 or 6.4, that percentage. Of course, the more you earn, you still have quite a lot of disposable income, even if you give 6.4%. There's a tapering, as it were. That's a much more costly figure for those on a lower income. Is there much research, or has there been much research done on the higher income and a way of increasing the percentage of giving on that upper end? Many of us realise that in charity and churches we're dependent on that, but I wonder if any of the research has revealed how that might sway and affect things.
Thanks, Simon. Just a brief comment, really, because we've not yet dug into sort of philanthropy giving. From those really, really high earners. Although we know that a handful did participate in our survey. What we did see when looking at the average percentage of giving across social segmentation, so across different income brackets, there wasn't the dramatic difference that you might expect. It wasn't completely the same across, and I'm afraid I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I remember going to look at those numbers thinking surely there'll be a difference. Either we'll see that people on the lower end of the income spectrum are actually far more generous than the people who have a lot, or the other way around, but we didn't. So that's there wasn't something stand out there, but perhaps definitely something to dig into in the future.
Hi, I have another question. I'm Rachel from Sat7. I have two questions, if I can get away with it. My first is, I see you've looked at giving, thinking about between churches and perhaps Christian causes. Did you explore at all overseas giving versus local giving? Because that's obviously a different motivation or a different type of cause.
Thanks, Rachel. So no is the short answer. We didn't look into that this year, but that's something that we've already flagged for next year's report to kind of dive a little bit deeper within each cause bracket, exactly the type of cause, the type of Christian cause that people are giving to.
Thank you. My other's putting a different hat on. In our local church, I've often heard church leaders say, I can't talk about giving because I'm a beneficiary in a sense of that giving. And what advice would you give to churches who they've said that and that's why they don't talk about giving?
Who would like to take that? Maybe Wendy or Mike?
I am a church leader. I no longer get paid by my church. I work for EA full time, so I always joke and say I'm one of the best qualified volunteers at the church. My husband is still a full-time pastor in the church. He does get paid. He does feel awkward about it. I have no qualms whatsoever. Even when I got paid, I had no qualms whatsoever, because the blessing beyond the money is vast. The way I look at it, God has modelled generosity so that we can mimic. And there is a huge blessing. Mike referenced the Malachi 3, verse 6 to 10, about bringing the tithe into the storehouse and the blessing that will be poured out. And I think the blessing... Oh, and Deborah's mentioned about you live longer. But there's huge blessings to giving. You get to see what is happening with your money. You get to feel good. There's, as well as living longer, there's been scientific research that has shown actually it makes you a happier person. There is so much more beyond the actual money that I think as church leaders we can promote. We can show people. So the church that I'm a minister of is an Elam Pentecostal church. So my husband, our cleaner, our cafe manager, they're all reliant on tithes predominantly for their jobs. We're reliant on the tithes for the heating and the biscuits that Chine mentioned earlier. Our guys get to see that. They get to feel a certain amount of pride in the fact that actually this is possible because of you, because of your generous giving. And I think sometimes we just need to have a different slant on giving and take it almost away from the money and the heart attitude behind it.
Yeah, it's a biblical principle that those who are ministering are able to take a salary kind of from that giving. It goes right back to the Old Testament and looking after the Levites, as I said earlier. Don't muzzle the ox that presses the corn. I mean, these are principles kind of in God's word. But I think when we understand that giving is not only to support the ministers, but also the wider ministry of the church, particularly to those kind of who are poor and in need in our community, then hopefully people will understand that actually this is communally our responsibility.
And if I can just add from the data as well, people love to know where their money is going. So if church leaders are standing at the front and explaining, or even if it's not the church leader themselves, explaining exactly where the money's going to, what it's supporting, that's going to encourage people in their giving. I also think there's something in, if you're embarrassed in asking for it, people are going to feel embarrassed in giving it or talking about it themselves, whereas actually we saw that in making giving a joyful thing and inviting people to be part of the cause that they're giving to, it's not just the minister's church, it's our church. That's going to reduce barriers to people giving as well.
I would just say that a couple of things. One is that I do think we put too much pressure on church leaders to do everything, right? I don't think it has to be the church leader who does the giving ask, partly because it might be embarrassing, partly because it's part of their salary. But there are other people. It might be the treasurer, or it might be someone else who within the church congregation who gives and why they give. So that's one part of it. But another is kind of following on from that. In the fundraising world, we talk about giving handles, £25 would go towards X, like some tangibility towards the giving. And also separating the business as usual, the running costs of the church, including salaries, from specific projects. Like my church is about 3 years into a £12 million building project, and we're a small church. That's not the kind of money that we have. We've had years of kind of getting money from grants and trusts as well as individual giving. But that is a very tangible thing. Like, we see the building going up. We see that people are the furniture is ready to move in, and then also when it's specific projects, it adds a kind of sense of urgency, and people respond to that well, as we've seen kind of lots in kind of crowdfunding or all these other sorts of fundraising in the past few years.
Fantastic. I think we've come to the end of our question and answer session. I'm very sorry. I think we could be here all afternoon with our panel and asking questions, but perhaps you could catch our panel afterwards at our networking and refreshments if you've got any more questions. Please would you just join me in saying thank you to our panel. I'd now like to invite our Chief Customer Officer, Nicola Johnson, up, who's just going to close for us. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Janie. So a lot of rich information has been shared here this afternoon, and I'm just going to walk through just some of the thoughts and suggestions on next steps. If you are a charity leader, know that what you do really matters. The findings in this research show that people feel more motivated to give if they feel connected to a cause that can make a difference and that they understand the work. Think about whether you are clearly communicating your mission and your work, and is it compelling? Do you have goals for this year which people's giving can help you achieve? How could you make these more tangible for your donors? Be good to give to. Demonstrating effective financial management and sound governance is absolutely vital for building your donors' confidence and trust in your organisations. Can donors easily access the information about your charity's finances and governance? And the policies? Are there policies that are missing or perhaps need to be updated? All these things are so important. And nurture your donors. Your supporters want to know that you see them as integral partners in your mission and not just merely funders. Perhaps think about, when was the last time you thanked your donors and shared your appreciation of them? And when did you last explain the impact that your donors' support has made to your mission? Perhaps when did you last share a personalised story of impact? For church leaders, teach on faith and finance often. We've heard about that this afternoon on stage. 11 out of the 39 of Jesus' parables are about money, and the Bible contains more than 2,300 verses on money, wealth, and possessions, and yet we're seeing a disconnect in this research between faith and finance, possibly due to a lack of teaching in this area. Think about how often you teach on generosity and giving in the church, and how is it taught in the church? What are we asking? Share more appeals from the front. The report findings show that people are prompted to give when there is an offering or a collection moment in the service. How will your congregation's contributions help to make a difference? And how are you communicating that and the impact in an encouraging way? And thirdly, take a financial health check. Again, solid finance and governance processes and policies are essential for the smooth operations, but also for building that donor trust. How can generosity and a healthy view of money help shape the culture in your church? And which areas of finance and governance need attention? Of course, we're focused here on church and charity leaders, but there are other ways and other people who can look into this report. We know that there are Christian workers and donors who can share information from this report as well. So I would again encourage you to read the full report, share it with your friends. There's a QR code, I think, coming up shortly on one of the slides. And please use our hashtag generosity report if you're sharing anything on social media. But again, take the time to wrestle with this and challenge yourself with the questions that have been provided at the end of the report. Perhaps even consider how Stewardship might partner with you to support in unlocking some of the giving potential in your churches and charities. And please provide feedback to us on the survey to enable us to improve and develop this data to be more meaningful in the years to come. I just want to finish with A couple more thank yous. I hope you'll agree that it's been a really rich conversation this afternoon, and I'd like you to join me again in thanking our panellists for the input that they had this afternoon. And last but not least, I'd also like to extend our thanks to the whole of the Whitestone Insight team and their wisdom and expertise in shaping and conducting this research, and their extensive support in helping us to put together the final report. We simply couldn't have done it without your help, so thank you very much. So this is a moment to say thank you to everybody who has joined us on live stream. We've really appreciated your support online today, so thank you and goodbye to you. And to those guests who are here in person, please do follow the Stewardship team up the stairs for refreshments and networking in the Benjamin Franklin room. Thank you.